Days after the shooting in Pittsburgh, the words "Kill all Jews" are written inside a Brooklyn synagogue. I'm Tim Harfman, and I'm standing by.
We're going to catch, we're not going to release.
President Trump vowing executive action to limit the way the United States handles asylum cases. Special All Souls Day field masses are honoring loved ones from the Brooklyn diocese who've gone on to heaven. Plus, the Pope made a historic trip to the Garden of Angels, a Rome cemetery dedicated to the unborn. The news starts right now.
It's totally shocking and horrible.
Reaction to hate-filled messages found scrawled on a Brooklyn temple's walls. Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Faublas. The anti-Semitic graffiti forced the Union Temple in Prospect Heights to cancel its preschool program today. The disturbing messages were found last night, less than a week after 11 people were massacred at a Pittsburgh synagogue. Currents News' Tim Harfman is standing by at the temple on Eastern Parkway with the latest. Tim, what can you tell us?
Liz, those anti-Semitic messages were written across doors and in stairwells inside this house of worship. Now the NYPD is asking for help to find a man caught on the synagogue's security cameras. The NYPD is looking for the man in this surveillance photo. They believe he's connected with anti-Semitic graffiti inside the Union Temple of Brooklyn, located on Eastern Parkway near Grand Army Plaza in Prospect Heights. The suspect is described as 20 years old, 5'8", 140 pounds, with black hair and last seen wearing a red suit jacket. An NYPD spokesperson said the hateful messages, written in black marker, included swastikas, Hitler, and the message, "Kill all Jews." Worshippers outside the Brooklyn Temple were disgusted.
It's totally shocking and horrible.
The hateful messages were discovered last night before a political event regarding next week's midterm elections. The gathering was canceled as a precaution. Today, the temple's Jewish school was closed. Synagogue officials didn't want to talk about the vandalism. Walker Reese is a Brooklynite and hosting loved ones from out of town. Hearing the news as they passed by the temple, they're in shock.
It's disgusting. It's just the amount of hate going on. You know, this is not what New York is about. This is a multicultural community. We all need to come together.
I see no reason somebody would target a specific religious group.
This latest hate crime is part of a string of attacks against Jews. Less than a week ago, 11 Jewish men and women were killed at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Earlier this week, swastikas were written on a brownstone in Brooklyn. The NYPD says hate crimes against the Jewish community are up compared to this time last year. Residents say during this tragic time, there must be unity.
One of my favorite things about the city is that there's people from all walks of life, you know, and to see things like this going on is just, it's not fair, and it really needs to stop.
Hands across the water. We all have to join together and, act out, speak up against this kind of behavior.
And again, the suspect is described as 20 years old, 5'8", 140 pounds, with black hair and last seen wearing a red suit jacket. In Prospect Heights, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
All right, Tim, thank you so much for that update. The NYPD is asking anyone with information about the suspect or the crime to call the Crime Stoppers hotline at 1-800-577-TIPS or text the police at crimes and then enter TIP 577. All calls and messages are kept confidential. Rose Mallinger was laid to rest today in Pittsburgh. She was the oldest of the 11 worshipers gunned down inside the Tree of Life Synagogue Saturday morning. 97 years old, she left behind 3 children, 5 grandchildren, and a great-grandchild. Known as Bibi, Yiddish for grandma, she was part of the synagogue for over 6 decades. The accused killer, Robert Bowers, is facing the death penalty. Cesar Sayoc will be transferred to New York to be prosecuted on mail bomb charges. The decision made in a Florida court this morning. Sayoc's accused of sending the dangerous packages to prominent Democrats. None of the bombs exploded and no one was injured. The 56-year-old faces nearly a half-century in prison if convicted. President Trump is vowing executive action that would limit new asylum claims by refugees. And as the migrant caravans continue heading to the southern border, he's warning U.S. troops could open fire. Andy Rose reports.
President Donald Trump announced Thursday his plans to revamp the U.S. asylum system, but did not give specifics on what he would change.
My administration is finalizing a plan to end the rampant abuse of our asylum system. It's abused.
Trump says he'll issue an executive order sometime next week, which will also include ending what he calls the catch and release immigration program.
We're going to catch, we're not going to release. They're going to stay with us until the deportation hearing or the asylum hearing takes place.
Trump went on to address the thousands of Central American migrants making their way to the U.S. border, saying it is like an invasion.
These illegal caravans will not be allowed into the United States, and they should turn back now because they're wasting their time.
Defense officials have emphasized that U.S. troops already at the border or who are headed toward the border are there to support civil authorities only. But Trump did not rule out military force at the U.S.-Mexico border when he was asked, what if someone in the caravan throws rocks or stones at troops?
And I told him, consider it a rifle. When they throw rocks like they did at the Mexico military and police, I say, consider it a rifle.
A U.S. defense official said troops will only use force in self-defense. I'm Andy Rose reporting.
A dozen of the caravan migrants are suing the president and others, claiming a violation of the Constitution. They're alleging the Fifth Amendment gives them the right to due process that the government is blocking. The plaintiffs are Hondurans, including 6 children. In 1993, Justice Antonin Scalia ruled the Fifth Amendment entitles undocumented immigrants due process of law. White-hot election campaigns and a strong jobs report are combining to set the stage for next Tuesday's midterm showdown. Omar Jimenez breaks down the employment numbers and the politics and what it could all mean.
The unemployment rate just fell to the lowest level in over 50 years. More Americans are working now than any time in history.
President Trump and Republicans are banking on the strong economy heading into the final weekend before the midterm elections. The latest jobs report showing 250,000 added jobs in October, much higher than expected.
We've got wage growth that's the highest we've seen in a decade. We've got a $250,000 or 250,000 person job number that, despite the hurricane, and we're seeing people reconnect to the labor force.
And that labor force participation rate at its highest level since May 2010.
The people who had been previously disconnected from society, discouraged because they were long-term unemployed because of the Great Recession, they're really coming back into the labor market in droves.
The unemployment rate in this report stayed at 3.7%, and wages grew a little over 3%. All good signs. But some Democrats say it's not just about the numbers.
The economy's not the stock market, it's not the unemployment rate, and it's certainly not the GDP. It's whether people are doing better, saving more, and dreaming bigger for their kids.
Now, the question is, how long can it last, given the ongoing trade war with China, the potential for inflation, and the fact that economic expansions don't last forever. But for the time being, politically, it just needs to last 4 days until election night, as Republicans hope it helps them cling to their congressional majority. In Washington, Omar Jimenez, Currents News.
The voters are fired up, according to election experts, and millions of them are voting early. Nearly 30 million ballots are already cast nationwide, with 4 days of the campaign still to go. In 18 states, the totals are easily outpacing the 2014 midterms. Analysts caution, though, against drawing conclusions because no one knows who the early birds are voting for. 2 top-notch experts will be here on Election Day. St. John's University's Brian Brown and Brian Kasuba of the Center for New York City Law. They'll be with me looking at the big issues for Catholics in this election. Today is All Souls Day, where we as Catholics commemorate all of the faithful departed. The Diocese of Brooklyn holds annual field masses outdoors to pray in a special way for loved ones who have returned to the Lord. One of the masses was celebrated at St. John's Cemetery in Middle Village with Bishop Raymond Geppetto as the celebrant.
Well, this is a wonderful tradition in the Diocese of Brooklyn that all the Catholic cemeteries offer Mass for the people who have loved ones buried in the cemetery, and they gather in great numbers today to remember their beloved deceased buried here at St. John's Cemetery.
The outdoor field masses also were celebrated at 4 other cemeteries throughout the diocese. The Pope's celebration of All Souls Day is being described as a powerful pro-life statement. For the first time ever, a pontiff traveled to a Rome cemetery where a large section is dedicated to the burial of children who were never born. Despite the harsh weather, hundreds joined Pope Francis as he celebrated Mass at the Laurentino Cemetery for Unborn Children. He laid several bouquets of flowers at their tombstones before the liturgy. In his homily, the Holy Father reminded everyone, never forget personal or collective memories, because the commemoration of the faithfully departed is also a day for hope.
Memoria e speranza. Speranza di incontrarci. Speranza di arrivare dove c'è l'amore che ci ha creato, dove c'è l'amore che ci aspetta, l'amore di Padre.
The Pope explained that 3 dimensions make this day concrete. The past is memory, the future is hope, and the present is the way forward. Francis asked everyone to look to the Beatitudes to help them remain steady on this path.
Qual è il navigatore che lo stesso Dio ci ha dato per non sbagliare la strada? E sono le beatitudini che nel Vangelo Gesù ci ha insegnato. Queste beatitudini, la mitezza, la povertà di spirito, la giustizia, la misericordia, la purezza di cuore, sono le luci che ci accompagnano per non sbagliare strada.
Many saints were once popes, but should popes receive special consideration for canonization? Bishop DiMarzio addresses the idea in his weekly segment with Ed Wilkinson, Into the Deep, which is just minutes away. A new development tonight in the story about human bones discovered on Vatican property. Investigators are suggesting the remains could belong to 2 different individuals, at least one of whom was a woman. The news is reopening questions surrounding the 1983 disappearance of teenager Emanuela Orlandi. Her father worked for the Vatican Bank when it was embroiled in financial scandal. More tests on the bones are being conducted. There's a lot more news headed your way. A big surprise as Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu sat down today with the Sultan of Oman. It's being called a tectonic shift. The reason why is next. The mom was near death after giving birth. Then her husband called on Oscar Romero. The parents talk about the miracle that led to sainthood. And Bishop DiMarzio will be here to discuss with Ed Wilkinson whether Pope should have a straight path to canonization. And do you have a story idea? Is something happening in your parish we should know about? We want to hear from you. Keep this email handy, newstips@thesalesmedia.org. We'll be right back. A snag in Asia Bibi's quest for freedom. Her death penalty conviction for blasphemy was overturned by Pakistan's Supreme Court this week. Now protests have delayed the release of the Christian woman. The demonstrators want her publicly hanged. Bibi spent 8 years on death row after she was found guilty of taking the Prophet Muhammad's name in vain during an argument. Russian President Vladimir Putin welcomed Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel to Moscow today. This is Diaz-Canel's first official visit since assuming office in April. The 2 men discussed the possibility of a military cooperation between their countries. The U.S. still has an embargo against Cuba. A big surprise today when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went to Oman and met with the Sultan. Oren Lieberman reports from Jerusalem that the impact of the visit could also be big.
The biggest sign in recent weeks of the warming relations between Israel and the Arab states is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Oman, where he met the Omani Sultan. But that's certainly not the only sign of tectonic shifts here in the Middle East. Israel's national anthem, Hatikva, playing for the first time in Abu Dhabi as Israeli athletes won gold at an international judo tournament. Last year, Israeli athletes had to compete under a generic flag. Now, the country's culture minister moved to tears. It's just one sign of warming relations between Israel and the Gulf Arab states. On Friday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made an unannounced visit to Oman for the first time in more than 20 years. Afterwards, Oman's foreign minister saying Israel should be treated like a state.
This visit comes against the background of diplomatic efforts that I've been promoting in recent years vis-à-vis the Arab countries. There will be more.
President Donald Trump's special envoy, Jason Greenblatt, tweeting, In the last few days, we have seen our regional partners, Oman, Bahrain, and the UAE, make statements and/or gestures signaling warmer ties with Israel. A more stable region leads to a stronger and more prosperous region. It is good for all. The warming relations are driven by a mutual struggle against Iran. Netanyahu has been perhaps the most vocal critic of the Iran nuclear deal, lauding President Donald Trump's withdrawal from the accord. Netanyahu has quietly had the backing of the Gulf Arab states. The growing relations have come not because of an Israeli-Palestinian peace process, but despite the lack of one. The Palestinians aren't happy about the change in relations with Israel, but haven't been able to stop them.
There have been reports of new Israeli deals with Saudi Arabia, the most influential of the Gulf states. Neither country has ever confirmed that such relations exist. With this week's celebration of All Saints and All Souls Day, tonight, Brooklyn's Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio is with the Tablet's editor emeritus, Ed Wilkinson, for a closer look at the recent canonizations of popes. Ed.
Thank you, Liz. So, Bishop, this week we've celebrated Halloween, we've had All Saints Day, today's All Souls Day Friday, and, you know, we wonder, we've got a lot of new saints in the church all of a sudden. We're celebrating all these saints. And one of the things is there's been a rash of popes who have been made saints. You know, I mean, is every pope who ever reigns going to be a saint these days?
I don't think so. I think, again, the close media attention that everyone gets, you know, it's like putting somebody under a microscope. You're going to see all the defects. And a saint doesn't mean you're perfect. I mean, you're going to have defects. But, you know, it's an extraordinary holiness under difficult conditions. I mean, our modern popes have lived with that. Difficult, hard situations, a lot of stress, and still trying to live a life of holiness with just contemplation in the midst of activity. So it is very difficult. Harder to be a saint today maybe than it was in the past.
Well, Paul VI is now a saint, and at the time he was a rather controversial pope. I mean, they blamed him for a lot of bad things that were going on in the church. What makes Paul VI a saint?
Well, I think because he suffered so much in his pontificate. I mean, he had to pick up the council that was not finished. He finished it, I think, very well. He transitioned the church in rather difficult times. It was so difficult, especially I lived through those days as a young priest. It was so hard for him. And then he kind of got a little bit overwhelmed. It seemed at the end he was older, wasn't well, and he's kind of overwhelmed. But it was a difficult pontificate.
John Paul II, you met him personally, right? I mean, why do you think he's a saint today?
Well, again, for 26 years he was pope, and he went from being a young, vibrant man to somebody who was incapacitated. He went through all the stages of life, it seemed, during that pontificate. And but this man had a deep relationship with God. There's no question about it. I remember one time I was there for Mass in the morning. There was no other bishop. I was able to be in there when he's doing his meditation. I mean, he seemed to be in another world. And then when he celebrated Mass, it was the same thing. No, this was an extraordinary man. I think there was extraordinary holiness there too.
Now, Archbishop Romero, we all remember him because he was assassinated as a bishop at the altar. And, you know, it seems to have taken a bit of time for him to be, and some people say there were political considerations that they didn't want to disturb.
There was some issues. Clearly, again, he was a man of holiness. He had come back that day, the day he was shot, from a day of recollection with the other priests. He was living a difficult life there. I visited the place where he was shot, and the small room he had at the hospital, lived very life of poverty. No, this was, again, an extraordinary man. Again, you're looking for saints. We want models that are extraordinary. The ordinary people, they're saints too, but very few people know them. He was a very public figure. To put him up makes a lot of sense.
What about our own Bishop Ford here? We're pushing his canonization cause, right? And,
right.
He was a martyr for the faith. Are there going to be political considerations because of the Chinese government?
Well, we don't know yet, but again, you move the cause forward. He's a servant of God. Now we have to go to the point of being venerable. We have to submit all of the information we have so that the Holy See can say this man is worthy of intercession, looking intercession for him. From him, the martyrdom, he was starved to death, basically. You know, he was so frail, and then they walked him and they killed him on the walk. That's what happened. So it really was martyrdom, and but martyrdom is kind of automatic in a sense, and they don't have to go through all the stages. But I think we're making him go through the stages, so there's never a question about political issue.
Yeah. Do you think we'll see him as a saint someday soon?
I think so.
Good. Thank you, Bishop. Liz, All Saints, All Souls, and now we're going back to you.
As always, thank you, Ed and Bishop DiMarzio, for that insight. Still to come on Currents News, the miraculous story of a mother near death after childbirth until her husband prayed for the intercession of Oscar Romero. We'll be right back. Italy has been hit for days with violent storms bringing hurricane-force winds and flooding. In Genoa, cleanup efforts continue after rising seas tore through the villages, leaving debris all over the area. Crews are still working to repair the destruction across the country. In Venice, many treasures have been lost, and St. Mark's Basilica badly damaged by the raging weather. Tonight, the remarkable first-hand account by parents who feared the birth of their child would end in unspeakable tragedy. That is, until the father prayed to El Salvador's first saint, Oscar Romero. Sean Richardson reports.
In September 2015, Cecilia from El Salvador nearly lost her life after giving birth to her third child. Her eyes and ears were bleeding, her body swelled up, her liver and kidneys were practically not functioning. The pain was so intense the doctors made the following decision: medically induced coma.
My mother tells me that when she went to see me at the hospital, she was devastated. Many friends who came to see me came out the same way, distressed, because I was unrecognizable. On September 4th, they told my husband, "This will be your wife's last night."
I opened the Bible and found a little image of Monsignor Romero. I asked him to listen to me. I said, "Monsignor Romero, please listen to me," I said to him. "For the great love you had for El Salvador, for the great love you had for the family, for the love you had for pregnant women, for the love you had for life, which you even gave yours to defend it. I asked you to beg God in His great mercy that my wife may not die. Today, this night, may my wife not die. I ask to you, beg God for mercy." The next day he went to the hospital to see his wife, and there he witnessed the following. His wife began to improve inexplicably, coinciding with the time that he had prayed for her healing. It was incredible. I had no words. I couldn't say anything. It gave me a chill and I remained silent. On September the 4th, she was supposed to die. On September the 14th, she returned to me. She left the hospital. Oscar Romero was an example of a bishop who knew how to put aside the comfort of his position to denounce the grave injustices committed in his country. He was fully aware that his life was at stake. On one occasion, there was even a plan to assassinate him, which was thwarted. However, the second attack did not fail, but it made him a martyr and a symbol for all of Latin America, which eagerly awaited his canonization.
What a powerful story. You know, based on that miracle, Pope Francis elevated Oscar Romero to sainthood at a huge outdoor celebration in St. Peter's Square on October 14th. That is Currents News. I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.